expensive packaging because we know the season for everything. We can get it as fresh as anything. If you're taking anything out, that's when you need preservations. So nobody should ridicule us about not knowing what we know or what we are not doing it right. If anybody is ready to pay a premium to any packaging, we can give you that standard. Coming to intertrading, because of the language barriers, some Portuguese, some French colonies, anytime you're crossing to another different-speaking African country, yes, we are one collectively, but you have issues. Interpretations, sometimes we get angry with each other, but what I'm soliciting with the media is this, broadcasting media. Please don't broadcast when we fight each other, because when we settle, it's no longer a news. You're not going to reverse it. So let us look at the positive aspect we have and opportunities we also privileged to have. And again, despite the technologies we have, we are the only African countries that this technology was just thrown to us, no proper control. That is why fake news are coming up, and we want to explore more. If you say don't do it, that's when people will start doing it. And by the way, who is giving those networks? It's our government. And they will leave the broadcasters now defending that wasn't it. If you now look around the world, like the Middle East, you are restricted to certain videos, coverage, postages. Why can't we emulate that? We just wait for the system to just take care of itself? Certainly it will not. So if we don't speak for ourselves the way it is, we will be defending. And defending doesn't take, it just comes secondly. So it might not take value. So trading in between us because of the large number we have and identifying all what we have, we might not need any other continent for our purposes. Number matters in every ratification. And we have the numbers and we have the needs. If we keep promoting goods outside our own territory, what means is that we are depriving ourselves opportunity to improve our own economy, opportunity to get employment, and opportunity to now kick away redundancy, and peaceful will be there. And when we now can't see any goodness in fighting each other, and we get to understand ourselves much more. And if we can just narrow it to families like a husband and wife, they do fight, but they end up sleeping in the same bed. So in Africa too, despite our differences, if we can just pardon each other and stop broadcasting negativity, let us look for more and more good things that everyone knows we have. If you're an African, you step in your feet, especially Nigerians, the world will know that you are getting to the top, either positively or negatively. But I believe the positive side is much greater. So let's say it ourselves and let's do it ourselves. So I would like to solicit with you to help us now tell the other outside world what we stand for, what we have, and what we are worth doing. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. That is the last of the statements from partners and sister unions. Please kindly indicate by raising your hand if you are in the hall. I'm here referring to Mr. Hamadu Karidio. Mr. Hamadu Karidio. Also, kindly signify by raising your hand if you are in the hall. Mrs. Grace Koza. Mrs. Grace Koza. Mrs. Grace Koza, I saw somebody raising. Grace Koza and Hamadu Karidio. All right, now to get into the technical session, and by the way, let me just note this. I'm sure a number of speakers who have come to the podium probably have been concerned as to what's playing out. There's a folded sheet here. This, of course, indicated the names of one of the attendees or those present here. There is also a table knife that is here. I'm not quite sure what purpose it is serving. I've not discussed that with my colleague. But I imagine that it is to remind us of the culinary diversity of Nigeria. I've heard some who have come here extol the dinner that you had last night under the auspices of the Nigerian Television Authority. But there's still a lot more to come in terms of the offerings that we have from different parts of the country. And the much you're able to get while you are still with us here in the Federal Capital Territory, please do enjoy it. So, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to kick off the technical session, let me at this point invite the Director General of the African Union of Broadcasters, Gregor Njaka, to give a statement on the Forum on Intra-African Trade. Gregor Njaka, and thereafter my colleague will introduce the panel conversation.
Thank you, sir. I would like once more to wish you the best in this country, Nigeria. And I would like to thank Director General of NTA and Director General of FXN for all what has been done so far. We are entering in the technical part of this General Assembly. And we will start it with a subject which can be very, very rude for most of us. It's concerning the trade between African countries. The aim of this trade is try to see what can be the contribution of media to strengthen these relations between countries, because one of the aspects which used to be pointed out is that we don't do a lot of business between us, between Africans. Most of the time, when you want to buy something, you think where you can have it in London, in Paris, in Germany, or in the United States, when just near you in Nigeria, there are people who are manufacturing it. So as the AUB, we said that we will not talk only about subjects concerning directly communication, but we have to open ourselves to other subjects. That's why for this time, we are talking about the trade between countries. But we will not stop there. We will talk about something else, the fight against cancer. How can media contribute in the fight against cancer? Some years ago, I think 2 years ago, everywhere we were talking about how can we fight against COVID-19. But after that, all thing is finished. So this subject is a very, very interesting subject because trade brings a lot of goods, a lot of things to our countries, and by doing trade, we improve the way of life of our people. That's why we will have a panel here which will try to help us to understand why the trade between nations is not good in Africa and what we can do to improve it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Njaka. Distinguished delegates, it's now time for the panel discussion. Let me at this point introduce the panelists, the topic, AFCFTA as a tool for sustainable development in Africa and intra-African trade seen by African business. Well, that's the topics that will be discussed here. Now, the panel I'd like to introduce Professor Ken Ife. Let's applaud. Let me also invite Professor Abu Hamisu. And I'd like to call on Emmanuel Wangibe, is the Director General of Cameroon Radio and Television. Thank you very much. And just a quick brief on the discussants. Emmanuel Wangibe, as we just introduced, is Director General of the Cameroon Radio and Television. Professor Kenneth Ife has been a member of the Presidential Governing Council of the Ministry of Finance Incorporated from January 2023. Is a lead consultant to ECOWAS Commission on Industry and Private Sector Development since 2008. And he is a consultant to the Central Bank of Nigeria on macroeconomic policy, advocacy, and communications strategy. But, of course, is Professor Ken Ife. For Abdurrahman Abu Hamisu, he majors in political economy and development studies from the University of Abuja, a researcher and development expert with both classroom and field experience. And his areas of interest and specialization include peace, dialogue, youth terrorism, and counter-extremism terrorism. He has researched and worked on all these areas, and he is part of the Presidential Committee on the Northeast Initiative. That's the Nigerian Presidential Committee on the Northeast Initiative. Today's moderator, let me introduce, is Professor Ghali Sherif Ibrahim. So let's put our hands together for Professor Ghali Sherif Ibrahim. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This discussion, including the presentations and the discussions, will be expected to last for just a little under 1 hour. Thank you.
also be from my department, a specialist in political economy. I also welcome Professor Ken Ife, who is here with us, a specialist in divergent and variegated areas of international economics as well as domestic economic structuration. Ladies and gentlemen, today we shall be holding this conversation on issues that affect Africa and African development. As a speaker earlier mentioned, we are a great continent endowed naturally with natural resources, but still we are yet to harness these potentials and resources to rediscover ourselves and produce that which is a sine qua non for our development. Today we shall be hearing from our expert in this particular area the midwifing of the African continental free trade area. How do we adopt this to move Africa forward, to change the narrative and come up with vital and fruitful recommendations on how to make intra-African trade sustainable for African development. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1991, the Abuja Treaty was signed, which was a prelude to the establishment of the African Economic Community. This effort was also consolidated in 2012 in its 18th ordinary session of the Assembly of the African Union from 29th to 30th of January 2012 in Addis Ababa to provide a framework of action to establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. And I'm going to start with Wangibe, who is right by my left side, about this particular topic, which is the first one. We have two topics that deal with the sustainability of Africa free trade or intra-trade. Then apart from this, we also have a question that deals with Africa intra-trade financing. So I will start with the first topic, which deals with the contribution of this particular establishment in the sustainable development of Africa and sustainability of the establishment itself. If I may ask, Wangibe, considering the fact that Africans, on the basis of the argument that we've not been trading among ourselves. For example, Malawi is not buying from Ethiopia. Somalia is not buying from Mali. Burkina Faso is not buying from Cameroon. Then, how do we, for example, make sure that the African continental free trade area becomes sustainable and make Africans trade among themselves? Instead of pushing our resources to Asia, to Europe, and elsewhere, how do we sustain this trade? And how do we initiate a framework of action to produce what Africans desire, what Africans wish to consume without necessarily depending on other continent or state to provide? How do we move this and how do we sustain it?
Thank you for that question. And
so I'll hold you for like 3 to 4 minutes.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on the panel. Let me begin by saying and picking up from one of the messages we've just listened to a few moments ago, the speaker said, on this continent, numbers. Switch off your phone. He said, the speaker said, we have numbers. Trade is about numbers. And if you are trading on a limited area, level of countries, you can only have that much in terms of production. But you remember the economics of production is called economics of scale. If you produce 200 bottles, plastic bottles, and that's your business, it's going to cost you per unit far higher than if you suddenly have the capacity to produce 2,000. You can only produce 2,000 because you have a demand for it. And that is our challenge. We must move from our micro states whose sizes, and you can remember on this continent, the difference in demographics is very huge. You have countries which are 1.5 million people, and you have countries which are 200 plus million people. A country of 1.5 million people doesn't have the advantages of the economics of scale if it trades only within its country that the bigger country has. It is an immediate opening, an immediate opportunity when we widen space, widen numbers, because you can only produce if you have the buyers. The challenge is for us to realize that nobody is taking off a piece of your pie by saying, let us trade with each other, because we hear this far too often. The fear that small states will be swamped by big states. I want to give an example. I'm a citizen of a country called Nigeria. I could have attended this conference by walking across a border, and I'll be here in Abuja. The demographic difference, Nigeria, 200 million plus, Cameroon, 30 million. Everybody from the pessimistic thinking would have said, no, free trade, Cameroon, Nigeria, Cameroon would completely be swamped by Nigeria. But one of the beautiful things why I would have traveled across the border is because for more than 30 years, there's a free movement of people and goods between Cameroon and Nigeria. I don't need a visa to come to Nigeria, nor does a Nigerian need a visa to come to Cameroon. And this has happened for more than 30 years, more than 3 decades. Yet, it has continued because both Nigeria and Cameroon have found the mutual benefits of that freedom. So, why are we scared at a continent?
Mr. Ongibe, thank you for that. One major issue, in your submission is that when a state within the African continent wishes to engage in this intra-African trade, and it has the natural resources, but without the capacity to develop such natural resource into a secondary good. And that is why, looking at the Article 2, establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area, is that the objective to promote industrialization, industry. So now, the industrial base and capacity is somehow lacking, in Africa and in so many African states. So, what is your take in especially boosting and how such industrial capacity can actually be initiated in order to promote this particular intra-African trade, because your neighbor might actually be in demand of what you have, but you cannot process it industrially. So therefore, these goods come from outside the continent for the consumption of your neighbor. So how could you, submit to this particular trend, and how do we sustain the African continental free trade area by making sure that Africans produce what their neighbors demand, what their neighbors desire to consume?
We know what we need. If you don't allow your African neighbor or fellow African country to produce for you, where do you get what you get from? Most of the time, we do not even get all what we want from outside. We invite other people from outside to come and process what we need. One thing is clear. The hindrance we have about Africa is that we talk of Africa as if to say it is one piece, homogeneous. And as Africans, we must admit it, we do not even know Africa that well. I take an example, and I'd like still to remain with Nigeria. One of the major consequences and one of the products that has taken a major hit because of the war in Ukraine, for those of you who are into farming, is fertilizers. The price of fertilizers across the continent has skyrocketed. But how many African countries know that just a few months ago, one of the biggest fertilizer producing plants was inaugurated in Nigeria, and that the product, the fertilizer from that plant, is being consumed in Nigeria today and exported. We need to know our continent better, know who can do what better than we can, and build on the strength of those who can do the things we can, and promote what we can do to others.
Thank you, Onginde. Let me now come to you, Dr. Abdurrahman Abu Hamisu. You look at the framework of the African Continental Free Trade Area, a single market in the parlance, a free trade area. There have been some issues with the ambience of free trade area, for example, with ECOWAS, for example, in terms of movement of, in persons and goods. How could we sustain the Africa Continental Free Trade Area by avoiding some of the issues of a single market as experienced by ECOWAS, to make this particular market sustainable for the entire continent of Africa?
All right. Thank you very much for your question. I would like to start by opening our minds to what has been playing out in Africa. The penchant to fight over territories, to say that we are Nigerians, we are Cameroonians, we are Malians, we are this, we are that. Before the coming of the white men to Africa, Africa was a single entity of empires. In trade interactions, including marriages, have taken place across and within Africa. Now, with the coming of the nation state, a well-documented impact of nation state on relationships in Africa was done by Bassel Davidson in his book, The Blacksman Body, Africa and the Cause of the Nation States. In that book, he documented part of the problems that we've been facing ever since African countries became independent. We became territorial with many posts between Nigeria, Benin Republic, between Nigeria and Togo. You have to cross many borders. These borders became the problem of our own interaction to the extent that you could not do business that is profitable because of different tariffs. Now that led to ECOWAS. And we know what happened with ECOWAS. It's still the same issue, territorial. We are territorial in nature. We don't want to give little for us to come together to say, okay, we can maximize the common benefits that we have in Africa. Now, going forward, if we want the continental free trade to succeed, there must be something that we have to do. What are the lessons that we've learned over time in our experimentation with cooperation among Africa and Africans? The first was AU, Organization of Africa Unity. Now, during that period, despite the organization existed, Africa was not free of conflict because of the vestiges of colonialism and the sense of territory that has been ingrained in on our minds to say that we have to do our thing. They will tell you that he or she is not aware of what the benefit would be if we come together. And that is why, right from the get-go, the push has always been to come together. But again, there are some other challenges that have made this very difficult. And these challenges, if we are not mindful of them, if we don't take care of them, then there will be a problem. I give an example. Now, the Francophone countries are much more closer to France. Their economy is integrated into the French economy. In terms of doing business, the Anglophone countries are much more comfortable and they lean towards Britain than France. All of these have implications for African integration and free trade. Now, what this is doing to us is what has been highlighted by the second to last speaker when he said that in Africa, we trade more with other countries outside Africa than between African countries. These are legacies of the integration that took place under colonialism. We are not saying that we need to delete just the way it was said before we need to delete. No. Asians are reviving Asian trade routes and they are maximizing profit with that, especially the Silk Road, if you remember. The Chinese are doing that. The Chinese are reviving the Silk Road because of the importance of that route for their own trade and development. In the Northeast, for instance, as my brother pointed out, for centuries, there were trade relationships between Nigeria and Cameroon, Chad, Niger. And if you look at, there was this work we did on the Northeast, and it shows the level of trade that is currently taking place, that has been disrupted by Boko Haram. Now,
all right, Abdulrahman, thank you. Another area which I want you to touch is looking at for example, sustainable nature of a regional bloc, as well as a regional economic arrangement. For example, considering Brexit, for example, because Britain initially refused to sign the Treaty of Rome, almost twice. It was later that Britain joined the EU. And in the long run, it exited the European Union. So in the discourses of sustainability, as it relates to the AFCFTA, how do we avoid the big economies, in Africa exiting the EFCFTA?
Well, for me, I think there is a little difference between the EU and the continental free trade. The EU more or less was an integration of countries that have decided to break down their borders to become one union. And then that led to a lot of issues. But in Africa, we're talking about continental free trade area. That did not preclude relinquishing the status of the state and the paraphernalia of the state as it were.
Nigeria also did not immediately ratify.
I'm coming to that, sir.
Sorry, it was later. So looking at this particular similarity, Nigeria is a big economy in Africa. It's also great in Europe. So being so skeptical, in joining the union, and later it joined, and finally it exited. So looking at these big economies in Africa, for example, how do you avoid having such economies also exiting the EFCFTA?
The only way to achieve sustainability in terms of continuing with the process to achieving continental free trade will rest mostly on the honesty on the part of the participating countries. Honesty in terms of whatever agreement that has been entered into, being respected by all member countries involved. I think one of the major fears, if I remember, has to do with the fear that some countries may be used by the big countries to dump their own industrial productions on the continent. And that fear was genuine because majority of the countries in Africa do not have the capacity to produce. And that is why industrialization was part of the component. Now, if all the countries involved will stick to the agreement and follow the agreement to the latter by not introducing any element that will lead to suspicion, that will lead to frustration, that somebody or another country will feel being targeted. For instance, if Nigeria fertilizer, as my brother said, was being exported to other African countries, and then let's say another smaller country that do not have capacity to produce went into agreement with a foreign country that is producing the same fertilizer but cheaper, Nigeria will feel it is being backstabbed by a fellow African nation. And if that continues, Nigeria will have a rethink to say that our interest is not well protected in this free trade agreement, and it will pull out. So that is why I'm saying that the bedrock that will solidify the relationship is honesty, commitment, and that very particular zeal to say we need to get Africa working.
Thank you, Abdurrahman. Let me come to Professor Ken Ife. If you look at the sub-regional, regional, and continental economic groupings and arrangement, looking at, let's say, Southern African Development Community, ECOWAS, East African Community, Central African Economic Community, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, even the EU, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and many more of them, they are not without challenges.
Correct.
What are the likely challenges that AFCFTA, is likely to face, and how could these challenges be surmounted?
Well, let's have 5 perspectives on this question. First of all is our leaders' balkanization, and we saw how that played out. Then they blame the Bretton Woods institutions that came into existence in 1944. And then they also turn around to say the International Division of Labor is all that is responsible. And what does that mean? The International Division of Labor was a conscious agreement to relegate African nations to producers of commodities. And then our commodities go to the West to be processed and then brought back to us to consume. And then what we found was that during the COVID era, we were struggling to get some of the processed products to consume. I mean, India, for example, will let us have some of those pharmaceutical materials and other countries. So we now saw globalization in reverse gear. And then I now thought that people now have learned their lesson. That in the end of the day, you have to be accountable for the economic future of your country. Now you come to the second part of your question, where we have found that if you compare ECOWAS to European Union, they both started this journey of regional integration around 1975. And at that level, at that point, the level of intra-regional trade was only 10% here and 10% there. But they took it more seriously. They dealt with most of the constraints that they have. And today, the intra-regional trade is over 70%. Our own, we are still struggling with about 12%. And in Africa, altogether, is about 14%. But some of the reasons why this is the case is because if you look at European Union that have economic partnership agreement with Africa and some other trade and investment framework agreements, they tended to work in the direction of consolidating that status quo, that stay there and produce solid minerals and agricultural raw material and send it over to us. So they tended to protect that in those agreements. So you find, for example, in the EU partnership agreement, it wants 8% of our markets. In other words, their market. So we have to import most of our products from there, which means it even excluded Africans, importing from African countries. And then a lot of us are doing business with China, so you don't even import from China. And the second obstacle that is put there is inter-regional and intra-regional coordination. Now, because they have agreement with 5 regions, you can only coordinate within your region. So if you get cotton from Nigeria, you can only add value to that in Burkina Faso before it becomes eligible to be exported into Europe under those terms. But if you take from Zimbabwe and bring it here, you are crossing the region. So I think this is the first thing, that the first port of call is for Africa Free Trade to get that off the way, because we've now moved into a single trade territory. And then also, many of these, but you can see how those structures have emasculated our propensity to get out of the block. And also when you want to borrow money from some of the Bretton Woods institutions, like we're going to borrow money to use coal to generate power, they said, well, but when this issue started with Russia and Ukraine, many of them have gone back to coal. So it became a double standard. Then you come to the third area. Export-led growth has accounted for the highest level of bringing people out of poverty. If you look at Asian tier economies, you could see the evidence. Most of them, Malaysia, China, Indonesia, they went for export-led growth. And export-led growth comes back to pull the entire economy and then make sure that you don't have pockets of, in fact, you see people like China, 600 million people out of poverty, whereas we are going more into poverty. You get these countries, look at their growth potential. See, it's all because when you export, you have to meet export quality standards. There has to be investment. There has to be quality, necessary quality infrastructure. You have to meet conformity assessment requirements for you to, and the moment you meet these requirements that enable you to export outside, already you are in a position to fight import into your territory because you are meeting the standards. So you begin to compete with those products that are draining and holding you to the ground. So that is very important. And then as you are doing that, the rest of the segments of the value chains are benefiting. And let me explain one impact of this. All of us, because of the position where we have all been relegated, you are actually in the, let's say for example, the tropical agriculture, we are in the tropical agricultural zone. We are producing the same thing.
And if you are producing the same thing, all the same raw materials, there's little incentive for you to trade those between yourselves because you're supposed to sell those to the north, to the west, to process for you. So until you move up the value chain, that's only when you begin to tap from the actual value that you are going to create. So that's why industrialization is quite critical for us to move up the value chain. We've had the story of cocoa. Nigeria, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire produce 73% of world cocoa. But when you look at the entire value chain of cocoa globally, we don't even account for up to 7%. So you see where the values are, where the employments are. So we have to think about moving up the value chain. But that brings me to the third point. How can FCTA improve, create more sustainable development and all that? World Bank did a study in 2001 that showed that if you invest, everybody has been saying all along in the last 15 years that Africa needs $93 billion for their infrastructure. But they said, no, wait a minute. If you spend only $20 billion in fulfilling the missing links in our regional infrastructure configuration, you can actually generate extra $250 billion in regional trade. You put 20, you get 250 billion. That tells you the case. So we all have our things, but just make connections, and then goods can flow. Now bear in mind, when you say goods can flow, you're actually talking about continental free trade. And then don't forget there are 4 levels. You have the free trade, which in our case now includes goods and then includes services. Services are a bit slower. And then this is where this organization has to play a stronger role to actually drive the agenda, make the real organization. For example, Central Bank needs to work hard because all the banks you have, correspondence bank, not corresponding bank, you have banks with branches all over Africa. They are there not because they are correspondence banks, not because they are extension of those big banks in their country. They are just there as national citizens of the country. And they have to go and negotiate the loans between these countries, not globally, no, between countries. South Africa and Nigeria have to sit down and look at mode 1, mode 2, mode 3. You have to look at the various modes. Mode 1, where you have to stay in your country and then run services in another country, like DSTV. Then you have a second one where you can just go in, do something and go away with your money. Or where you now go and establish. You have to sort that out, country by country, and then now have mutual recognition before you can actually do the business. And then we have to...
Thank you, Professor Ken. I also want to add another question to you before we come to the second round. You look at the objective, driving the formation of the AFCFTA. We discovered that there is the need for continental customs union. All right, continental customs union. If you look at the African states critically, in terms of the total volume of goods and even services coming, the inflow into their state, not actually the same in terms of volume and quantity. From the experiences of the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, how sustainable could the customs union, continental customs union for Africa will be? How could it be sustained?
Okay. There are 4 stages in the regional integration agenda. The first stage is free trade, which we have talked about. The second stage is common market. But you can't actually have a common market if you don't include investment, common investment. So you have to have common investment codes and common investment policy because it is about your investment. You can't even create anything without making investment. The flow is make an investment, investment creates economic activity, that creates employment, employment creates disposable income, and from disposable income you can buy property, pay for your energy, pay for your health, pay for that. That's the cycle. So you don't bring government into this. So you have to have investment to come in before you head out to that. But the third one is customs union. And then the fourth one is economic union. That's where we are talking about single currency. Now, in the customs union, if you take ECOWAS, for example, we have implemented our common external tariff. That is the core. That means that all of us as an entity now, we have a common policy on what duties we charge to anything coming into our territory. So that is there. But where we haven't got to yet is the single, the final side of the customs union is where we have a pool. In other words, it doesn't matter where the tax is collected or duty or that, wherever it's collected, it all goes into a single pool from where we now distribute them based on some formula. And those formulas may be population and general income, all this stuff, but then you share them. That is when you are now ready to move to the next stage. Then, of course, Thank you, Prof.
Let me come back to Ongibe. And I have this question for you, please, looking at the second topic of financing intra-African trade. Should we rely on regional, sub-regional, or even continental economic blocs, such as the European Union, for example, the BRICS, or any other regional economic system in the world, or we should rely on international financial institutions or even individual states in financing this trend to create a kind of a strong or a drastic intra-African trade system?
I want to pick up from a point Professor Ife just made. The experience of the development of our economic blocks. And this is something we need to be patient, but we must bring in a serious political drive, as he said. He showed to us how we started all this issue of building our free trade areas almost at the same time with many Asian countries. But because there was dedication to it, they had the same challenges, they overcame these problems, and they're moving on. The experiences in our different blocks within the African continent are not the same. We are moving at different paces, and we can understand the SADC bloc, the ECOWAS bloc, are about the most aggressive about integration. If you come and you start looking at the Central African bloc, it is still like news to somebody in the Central African bloc to hear that you can leave from here and go to Ghana, leave from Nigeria and go to Ghana without a passport. Because Gabon, just to move to next door Congo, you need a passport, you need a visa. So we are not at the same pace in terms of our integration process. And this is what we need to really incorporate. Because as I was indicating, we are not moving at the same pace. And we must continue to remember, coming back to your question, how do we do this? The principle is it's business. Business is risk-taking. Risk-taking because you, first of all, invest with the hope that you sell and make money. Where would the investment come from, as you were asking, in this process? We must begin by counting on our own first, but clearly it is overwhelmingly demanding in the financial resources for integration. Of course, in addition to our own resources, we will have no alternative but to borrow from other institutions. The fact that we are running our own trade area does not mean that we are cut off from the world, the way the world economy operates. The world economy is one where you have resources found in different parts of the world and which move to the places where they generate resources. There is no way the China, we take the Exim Bank for example, that has the resources, will say, I'm not loaning that money to the African Free Trade the initiative because it is a competitor to me, because it is indeed, that's how China will generate its own money. So we need the political will, we need to put our own resources, and we need to be serious about it so that people will be convinced to borrow money for us to invest to make this to become true.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Abdulrahman, looking at the still financing intra-African trade, the involvement of private sector, is essential to have a functional integration, technicians, professionals. The argument that the government should even sometimes, stay aside, allow the private sector, allow the technicians to take over, the business environment, the trading environment. So what role do you think the private sector, the technicians can actually play in sustainable development initiative coming from the AFCFTA?
Thank you very much. It is obvious from the various arguments in the implementation of the neoliberal policy of the state having to hands off from providing some sort of services are beginning to emerge. In Africa, we told that very particular line, and we've seen the consequences of saying that the state should hands off. This is not to say that private sector cannot play a role. There are roles that are played by government for public good. They are not profit motivated. The private sector sometimes, most of the time, nearly all of the time, is motivated by profit. In Africa, if we want to subject everything to profit motive, then there would be chaos. In Asia, their development is anchored on the fact that the state is playing an active role in collaboration with the private sector. So the state is the biggest spender. It guarantees most of the equity and everything. So for me, it's a mixture of roles. If, for instance, the international highways that we needed to build to connect African countries, for instance, the road that was proposed in 1970s, that's supposed to link Nigeria and Cameroon, that is yet to be constructed, is to be subjected to private initiative. In an African that we're saying that the majority of the people are grappling with poverty and they needed to be pulled out of poverty. And they have to toll, they have to tax and overtax the people in order to recoup their money. Then it will not solve any problem. A lot of persons will go deeper into poverty than being pulled out of poverty. So there are areas that calls for partnership between the African states, the African Union, ECOWAS, whatever body it is, with private sector. Because the first sunk cost, the first investment would be done by government. If nothing, there must be sovereign guarantee before any business can take place. And no any individual would do that on behalf of any government or on behalf of any institution. So it should be a mixed bag of intervention because financing is crucial. Where the state cannot do that, where the blocks cannot do that, then private investment can come in.
All right, again, Abdurrahman, looking at the Belt and Road Initiative, for example, the Chinese BRI, which is ready to actually finance businesses and infrastructure, which is ready. The European Union is also there, the United States, and other, stakeholders, all to this particular regard. Then how do you see the intervention of these particular areas and programs, in financing Africa Continental Free Trade Area? Should we continue to accept this particular offer without looking at the challenges that might actually erupt into this particular area? Or no, we have to be very strategic in looking at who finances, intra-African trade, in order to avoid further exploitation, as well as to have a kind of harmonious business environment in Africa.
All right. Well, for me, I think we have three options before us as a continent. The first option, which was what we rejected in 1980, when we had Lagos Plan of Action. And the basis of Lagos Plan of Action was self-reliance, harnessing your resources to develop yourself. And we abandoned that and we went to the Bretton Woods institution. And what we have, after so many years of depending on the Bretton Woods institution, debt without development, poverty, and missed resources that have been depleted. And the debt are still there for us to pay, and even the next generation will pay those debts. Now, we have the Chinese. How did Chinese rose to this very particular prominent position in the world? It's self-reliance. And they continue to solve their problems internally, developing their capacity. One thing that we need to understand is the mystification of what is called industrialization. The use of technology to do things. We have local technology all over Africa that can solve our problems. That was what the Chinese did. They put simple technologies into the hands of their people, especially the farmers, by developing very cheap technology that take into account the Chinese peculiarity and the poverty level of the people. Because if they are to import such machines from, say, European Union or from America, they will not be able to afford it. So it's not about taking loan, it's not about depending on our people. You need to depend on our people that sees you as a partner that you needed to work together with to achieve a common goal. For instance, the Chinese win-win situation policy of engaging Africans. The One Belt, One Road initiative is a massive intervention that wants to build infrastructure across Africa. And if the terms are right, the terms are not meant to subjugate Africa, to make Africa to remain perpetually as a producer of raw materials that are supposed to be imported, to be exported in order to earn money to pay back a loan that you don't know when. And then we are now being overwhelmed by loans to the extent that we become bankrupt and not even credit worthy. They add that to the fact that as Africans, you need to maintain an account overseas that is called savings in order for you to do business with other countries. Now, these monies are always put there. God knows when we are going to draw them. And these monies are contributing to the economies of those countries that are keeping this money for us. And then, on top of that again, we go to borrow money to service things that we will not be able to pay for.
Thank you, thank you. Prof. Ife, just a build-up from what Abdurrahman said. It is obvious that we cannot do without these, let's say, foreign enterprises. Why? Because imagine oil in Nigeria, oil and gas, for example. Most of the companies are actually foreign. If you go into mining in so many of African states, most of the companies are also foreign. So it is obvious that we must actually deal with the foreign entrepreneurs. So now, must we partner with them in this particular processing of the natural resources we have to make finished goods in order to trade among ourselves, or should we exclusively leave it in their hands to do it, then we market it, we trade, among ourselves as Africans? Which option should we take?
I don't think we should be pushed to a position where you are having to make a choice. Because you have to work with them. They have the technology, they have the market, they have all sorts of things. You have to work with it. But let me tell you, there are two questions. First question is, you're talking about financing. Who are you financing? The second question is, financing what? So if you take public sector, why would you finance the public sector? Well, maybe on trade-related infrastructure. So that's fine. So there may be some kind of road, there may be some trade-related infrastructure, quality infrastructure, which is standardization, testing, all of that. But most of these, government doesn't have money. Our governments are in dire straits, and they are facing fiscal stress. So that's not where you want to go. Even those who would lend to them are scared of lending. So we should go for private sector PPPs and an abundance of those. Most of our governments are less than 10% of GDP. So what the hell are you asking government to do? Except to find a suitable PPP that will deliver that obligation and then connect it to the private sector. So it's not about building a road that goes to a minister's village. We're talking about, if you want to do that, please connect all the production centers as you go to the minister's village. So it has economic value. And there's a possibility that you can repay that money. Number two, if you are saying who a private sector give them money, you have to look at this. First of all, they need money for production. They need money for industrialization. They need money to prepare products for market. So access to market and quality, all of that. So there are these stages. At the level of production, many banks will tell you, oh, we lend money to you, but they don't lend money to agriculture. So government must work with the central bank to de-risk agriculture lending. So in that way, you can force them to lend to them. Yes. Then of course, when you come to the level of manufacturing and industrialization, you now have to look at, I hear a lot of people say, FDI, oh, right, FDI, how much are you getting? But you mentioned down the day that put $19 billion in building one refinery, which is many, many times about 3-4 years of FDI.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Domestic research mobilization.
Thank you, Prof. Now I come back. We are now going to wrap up. But I have like 60 seconds from you. Final submission. Ongiba Emmanuel, the media. How do you instrumentalize the media in promoting intra-African trade financing? How could this be achieved using the media?
Thank you. As media, I always say we are storytellers. We choose the stories we tell. We can tell the stories that motivate people, that inspire people. We can tell the stories of our economic champions, like the Dangotes, that inspire other people. Or we can choose to tell the stories of fear about integration. I submit that fear and change are bed mates. When you talk of change, fear steps in. I take a simple example, and I'm sure I lost my dad 25 years ago. He was a small trader. Today, I'm sure if my dad could be hearing me discussing this in the way I'm discussing it, he would be so frustrated in his grave. This was a man who in 1980, sitting in Cameroon as a small trader, coming across the borders in Nigeria, decided to buy shares in Nigerian brewery. He could have told himself, this is not my country. How am I sure this will move on? Today, I talk with a stockbroker in Nigeria about the shares in Nigerian brewery bought by my father more than today, it's about 50 years ago, and there is no question about ownership. A broker tells me, Emmanuel, your shares over this years have got this amount of dividend. My submission is, we have taken too much time in our discourse building the obstacles that blind us to the gains and the advantages of integration. And as media, I think it's our role to tell the stories of how champions in different parts of Africa, individuals, and this happens to be true because business people are by nature risk takers. They are not scared as we are, and I'm sure with a good combination of the good stories about government, but tilting a lot of effort on private sector, on our champions, we can move this process.
Thank you, Emmanuel Ogimbe. Abdurrahman.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry if you've forgotten, let me give you another one. Just 30 seconds, please.
Okay.
Now, looking at the whole process of media engagement,
yes,
into intra-African trade reportage, what is your submission?
My submission will be that the fight is on. I choose to use the word fight in quote because the policy to ensure that Africa is portrayed in a bad light that will scare away investors is ongoing. It is now left for us to either debunk such and work extra hard to portray honest interventions that are on board to make Africa safer and to attract investment. Bearing in mind what is happening internationally, the penchant to write for the confirmation of some other organizations that will invite us to be awarded prizes, not writing the ratings that will portray Africa in good light so that Africa can reap the benefit of all the strivings it has undertaken. So the onus is on us, and I must use this opportunity to commend the initiators and organizers of this very particular event because it provides rooms for interactions and first-hand information that can assist to build the network that will change the narrative in Africa.
Thank you, Abdurrahman. Professor Ife, the development and growth of regional integration is hinged on the commitment of the member states, to contribute towards building. Should African states pursue their independent national interest, towards integration, or they should deal with the collective interest?
Well, it has to be a mixture of the two. You cannot tell somebody to forget his sovereignty until you drag him to the point where he is and decide that it's less important. But there are three areas concern your question. One is that the media can promote best practice, international best practice, because there's no trade challenge or trade problem that we don't have an African solution to it somewhere in Africa, one of the African countries. So you have to raise those and disseminate those best practices. The second thing that they could do is to promote regional frameworks. We do have regional frameworks, policy frameworks, regional strategies. I did a lot of those for ECOWAS. I did Africa SME strategy, private sector development strategy, and then MSME charter, and all of those things. Disseminate those. When you go to your member state, ask them to come and talk to you what you are doing about this policy. They don't do it. And some of them are doing it on purpose because of subsidiarity principle. Then the final one, of course, is promoting the regional business models. EcoBank was nurtured by ECOWAS. And look at it, it's the most diverse bank across Africa. Then we have the C-Link, which is shipping line going at the no corners. Then you have ABID, which is ECOWAS, the industrial and the development bank. There are so many of these. Sky is now rising, following the next, as a hub in Rome.
These are business models, regional business models. They should promote those.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this particular NTA, the leadership of AUB, the participants and everybody who contribute to the success of this particular session, especially the panelists, thank you all.
Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, as they take their seats, let's once more applaud from the moderator, Gali Sharif Ibrahim, to the discussants, Kenife, Abu Hamasu, and Emmanuel Wangibe. Let's applaud them one more time. Thank you very much. Well, we are just in time for lunch. And I'm told that lunch is for just 15 minutes. I believe so. I believe it can be done because upcoming will be the symposium on sports events, management and exploitation of broadcasting rights. That's after lunch. Lunch will be right away. As soon as we step out of the hall, there will be ushers who will conduct you to the appropriate place. Just to say that your tags will admit you to lunch. So please keep those tags close, and as soon as you step out, the tags will admit you to lunch. And just a quick reminder of what we were all told about just before this event commenced. The safety officer, the safety manager, had reminded us that if we indeed have to step out of the hall, let's please go along with our valuables, especially those ones like the phones and the laptops and palm tops. Please keep them close to you and keep them safe. As you step out, you are encouraged to go along with them. So once again, it's time for lunch, and after lunch we'll reconvene in the hall, and that is when we'll take on the symposium on sports events, management, and exploitation of broadcasting rights. Thank you very much, and bon appetit.